Alfred Mlaba, the High Commissioner in the United Kingdom. We are growing as South Africans from a very huge backlog that we found on the table as government, but we are determined and we've got all the energy in the last 20 years, which has been demonstrated so well with the achievements that we have made in delivering water to communities that would never ever have had water, delivering electricity, roads, sanitation, and many other opportunities which in the African communities were like a dream. We still have a lot to achieve. We have a long-term plan. Our 2030 National Development Plan is in place and we are working with it forever as the government led by the ANC. We are very confident that the support that we have right now will not be amiss, will not be misused. We are going to make sure that service delivery and all the opportunities, particularly the growing of the economy, is very much on our radar screen. We are going to do the best we can for our South African people.
My name is Chichi Maponya. I'm the chairman of Brand South Africa. It's the marketing agency of South Africa. We're responsible for building the nation brand, driving pride and patriotism, driving competitiveness in the country. We are responsible for the image of the country and the reputation management of the country. South Africa has come from a country that was alive with possibilities to a country that was a rainbow nation and to what it is now, inspiring new ways. We have achieved so much in the young 20 years of our democracy, from access to housing, access to sanitation, access to water. The many other achievements are the legislative infrastructure, the fact that we have one of the best legal systems in the world, one of the best stock exchanges in the world, and so many other institutional support that has been established.
I'm Suresh Kamath. I used to be the vice chair of the anti-apartheid movement, and I was chair of the committee that organised the two Mandela concerts in 1988 and 1990. In the last 2 decades, South Africa has come on a long way with the infrastructure, with the provision of education, health and housing for its peoples, but it's still got a long way to go, and I'm hoping that I'll continue to be involved in solidarity with the people of Southern Africa and the people of South Africa as they move towards better development and improving their society.
But I think going forward will be a year, 20 years that will be a year focusing on industrialization, reducing poverty, reducing the inequality, and creating many entrepreneurs and job opportunities and real jobs. South Africa has a lot to celebrate. It is definitely a better place to live in now than it was 20 years ago. And we should really celebrate the achievements that we have done. And we should acknowledge those as a stepping stone for the work that needs to be done. And the fact that in the 20-year review, both the gains and the challenges are being recognized, I think is indicative that we know what it is that we have to do to take us to the next level in the next 20 years of the democracy.
When it comes to democracy, I would say South Africa has fared quite well in the notion that no longer could you be arrested and jailed and killed for your ideas. No longer, if you disagree with somebody, can you be killed or jailed. In a sense, there's an openness in being able to associate and literally, be and want to be what you want to be. Yes, there's many challenges in South Africa that exist at this particular moment, chief of which is the aspect of corruption, and it's a serious problem that has a danger of really reversing some, I would say, some of the great achievements that have happened post-apartheid in being able to make sure there's schools, there's clinics, there's roads, places where there were not, there's electricity, there's more sense of hope and possibility that were there. And, you know, in a sense, this idea of corruption starts to take away, because no longer are you able to deliver services in the manner you were able to do so before. And so, I mean, there are a lot of challenges. I mean, you well know about Marikana and the shooting of miners, you know, who were demanding a wage. And that, in a sense, was a shock to our system in a way, because we thought, but how is that possible? This is something we associate, in a sense, with apartheid. And so these are some of the challenges of things that, as South Africans, we need to demand never ever happen again. They never come back in a way.
I joined the anti-apartheid movement in the early 70s as a student, and I got involved with the movement because I saw the injustice that was going on in Southern Africa, and my own involvement with anti-racism in this country. And over many years I was involved in a number of campaigns to boycott Barclays, to boycott outspan oranges, to persuade people not to buy South African wine. I was involved with the trade union movement to persuade my colleagues in the trade union movement to disinvest from South Africa.
I left South Africa in 1963 for exile. I became involved in the struggle when I was thrown out of school because of my color of my skin and race, where I grew up in Newclear, near Shafai town. From that day up to now, I'm totally committed to the freedom of South Africa, and I spent all my life working in the ANC and in the anti-apartheid movement, not only in the UK and elsewhere.
Over many years, took part in marches and campaigns to release political prisoners, to stop the hangings of freedom fighters in South Africa. And eventually in 1988, I got involved in the committee to put on the 1988 Free Mandela concert. Mandela had become an icon of the struggle. His name was known across the world, but we wanted to make sure that he would be released from prison.
Hello, I'm Robin Denslow. I'm a broadcaster and a journalist, and I'm involved in the project, I suppose, because I was one of the BBC's presenters at the 1988 Nelson Mandela tribute concert, which was a quite extraordinary event. I think it must have changed his image enormously, because at the time he was being regarded very much as a terrorist. Margaret Thatcher had called the ANC a terrorist organisation, and here was a concert being seen by 600 million people around the world that very much wanted his freedom and wanted him treated as a political prisoner, not as a terrorist. So it was a very important event, I think, in helping add to the pressure on South Africa. And since then, of course, we're now celebrating 20 years of freedom in South Africa with free elections. Still an awful long way to go, but it's an extraordinary milestone, and it's great to be here.
We wanted to get Nelson Mandela released before his 70th birthday. We weren't able to quite do that, but he was freed 2 years later. It was a feeling of euphoria and anticipation, for the struggle still would be going on beyond the release of Mandela. So I was really pleased that eventually in 1994 that South Africa was able to have a democratic and free election in which a government was elected by the majority of the people.
When we got the vote, South Africa has come a very, very long way. A lot of good has come about in these 20 years, a lot of development, quite a lot of positiveness. Yes, there are some negative things, but I think the positive things outweigh the negative things.
Democracy today compared to democracy 20 years ago is miles apart because we have a free society, you can vote for who you want to vote for, everyone has the right to vote. However, the ANC was as the vast majority, and that means they abuse power sometimes, and that means there's no checks and balances, and also means that democracy is sometimes abused. So the fact that we can vote for who we want to is very important and a really positive thing. The fact that we need a bigger majority in terms of opposition parties are equally as important, and I think the next election is going to really show how the DA has come strides in terms of being a more stronger opposition party and creating a better balance of power ultimately.
Yes, my name is Siu Zokwana, the president of NUM. I'm a mine worker. The struggle of mine workers is to get the fate of those who contracted silicosis in the mines many years ago and who are still contracting it, to get their employers to take note of it that those workers deserve compensation. Currently, we're still fighting with Anglo-American and many other 29 companies who are refusing to accept that they are responsible for the fate of those miners. If we don't win that victory, it means that those miners will die poor, their families will struggle. But 20 years of it meant that the lives of mine workers have changed. We have a good legislation currently where workers can refuse to work in places they believe are dangerous. But broadly speaking, in our country we're able now to vote, but beside voting, housing has been offered, has been built for our people. Sanitation has been improved, health institutions have been built, education has been expanded. Although we have got challenges, but we believe that a lot has been done. Hopefully in the next 20 years to come, we'll be a better country to live in.
I think South Africa has made huge progress in the short amount of time that we've had to sort of go from fighting for freedom, having freedom, and then try and establish a whole new system for schooling, education, politics, justice, and social justices, and all of those things that don't sort of happen overnight. It has to happen over a long period of time. And the fact that we have a constitution that the whole world is looking to and saying that's a good sort of template to build from, it's an achievement in itself. The fact that a lot of people in the conference today have raised points like they've got dignity as a human being, they're able to provide for their families. That's sort of the things that people take for granted, but that's the sort of thing that 20 years ago we didn't have. So we've made a lot of progress, and there's still lots of work to do, but in the 20 years that we've had, we need to look back and think, actually, yeah, we have done some good things, and we do have a good story to tell. We just need to focus on trying to push ourselves and be better and do better, and it doesn't just fall upon the government, it falls upon every single individual person to look at how they can contribute to the country and not just rely on other people to make it better for them. It's collaboratory, so it's both yourself and the government and the people around you, the communities. You look at what you can do and build that up together. That's what I think.
I'm Peter Hain, British Member of Parliament. My childhood was in South Africa. My parents are both South African born, involved in the struggle in the late 50s and early 1960s, eventually forced into exile after being jailed and banned. And then I was involved in the anti-apartheid struggle here, particularly stopping all white Springbok tours and isolating the old white South Africa from international sport.
My name is David Kenvin. I was the chair of the London region of the anti-apartheid movement. Basically, I grew up in an anti-apartheid family. My grandparents organised the first meeting outside South Africa in support of the ANC, and I continued the tradition of their work. I became involved in the Stop the 70s tour campaign in 1968 when the Springbok team were coming over. I then became a volunteer in the offices of the anti-apartheid movement in Charlotte Street and then Mandela Street. I also worked for the ANC both here in London and in Johannesburg during the 1994 elections.
I'm Brian Filling. I'm now the Honorary Consul for South Africa and Scotland. And prior to that I was chair of the Scottish anti-apartheid movement, and I'm still chair of AXA Scotland. So I got involved a long time ago when I was a student, and I was a founding chair of the anti-apartheid movement in Scotland in the mid-1970s. And one of our early campaigns was to get the freedom of the city for Nelson Mandela, which we achieved in 1981. So Glasgow was the first city in the world to give freedom of city to Nelson Mandela. The Lord Provost of Glasgow, we then arranged to go to New York and to the UN Special Committee, where he launched the worldwide Lord Mayor's petition calling for the freedom of Mandela. And we also went on to rename a street in Glasgow, Nelson Mandela Place. We chose the street rather deliberately because the South African consulate was on the 5th floor of the Stock Exchange building in that street, so the apartheid embassy had to look out their window and see the name Nelson Mandela. They chose not to use the address but to use a post office box, and not long afterwards, in the early 90s, they actually closed the consulate. So Glasgow's had a long connection with the anti-apartheid movement.
When I look back on 20 years of democracy, people almost take it for granted, but it was a huge struggle, a bitter, hard fight, and an amazing amount has been achieved. Millions with new housing, running water, sanitation, lots of people better off, although big problems remaining. Poverty, massive inequality, big issues still to tackle, because the apartheid legacy was such a huge legacy. You cannot overcome it or deal with all the problems in 20 years. The struggle goes on, and the solidarity from friends of South Africa must continue as well.
Well, my name is Patsy Robertson. I'm Jamaican, and I have been involved in the anti-apartheid struggle from the 60s, really, because Jamaica was one of the first countries which banned South African passport holders in the 50s. And then I worked with the Commonwealth Secretariat during the period when we were strong advocates for ending racism in all of Southern Africa. And so I was involved in that momentous struggle. During that period, Commonwealth leaders were very firm in stating that they would South Africa would have to end apartheid.
I joined the anti-apartheid movement because apartheid was outrageous. It was just wrong to treat people differently based on the colour of their skin, and, well, actually to discriminate against people, to make sure that their living conditions were far worse than the living conditions of white people in South Africa. It was an evil system. It had to be opposed. It had to be overthrown. And it is one of the things I'm most proud of in my life, is that we actually achieved it. And 20 years ago, I was in Johannesburg on the 27th of April, helping the ANC to organise the vote, and we won, and it was just wonderful.
Post-apartheid, we regarded the problems of the legacy of colonialism, apartheid, that South Africa still have to deal with. So we worked, therefore, to make sure that Scotland continued to give support to the new South Africa, and a whole range of projects have been done since in education, health, with business. We work particularly with the Eastern Cape because of Scotland's historical links with the Eastern Cape. It was Scots missionaries who founded Lovedale and the University of Fort Hare. In fact, Governor Mbeki was named after the first principal of Lovedale, the Scots missionary William Govan. So that's how he gets his name. So the big connection with Glasgow, and I'm glad to say that Governor Mbeki came in 1990 after his release,
gave the keynote speech at a conference, the Sashaba International Conference. It was about cultural resistance to apartheid. And then Nelson Mandela came in 1993 to collect all the freedoms of all the UK cities in Glasgow. So our link between Glasgow and Scotland more generally with South Africa continues, and we're very pleased to see the positive developments in this, the 20th anniversary year. And of course all the, the clean water, the housing, the electricity, all of those things, but particularly the dignity of South Africans having been regained.
We brought in the banning of sporting contacts with South Africa. We sent the Eminent Persons Group to South Africa in 1986 when a delegation led by General Obasanjo, later becoming President of South Africa, and Malcolm Fraser, Prime Minister, former Prime Minister of Australia. And they were the first official group to visit Nelson Mandela in Poulsbo prison. And they came out and their report was called Mission to South Africa. And in it they said what South Africa had to do was to release Nelson Mandela, unban the ANC, and begin negotiating. Within 5 years, apartheid had collapsed. The election was in '94, and we have the South Africa which we had all longed for. So it's a very happy occasion for me to be here to celebrate the 20th anniversary of South Africa's long and successful struggle for freedom and human dignity.
And we hope to continue to work because we see it as mutual benefit, building those links. It makes for a better, peaceful world. If people understand one another, can work with one another, can learn from one another, and we're still learning from South Africa, which we regard as a beacon against racism, so it certainly helps us in our struggle in Britain, where of course there is still racist policies adopted by some, racism in institutions and racist ideology. You need to keep fighting it. It doesn't just disappear. You don't ever fully defeat it. It re-emerges because it's an interest of some of those with power and privilege to use issues which divide, and race of course is one of them.
Well, I think South Africa has come very far since 1994. We came from a period of oppression to a period of freedom, of democracy, and I feel like that our government have done a tremendous job in taking us from a period of where we had no rights to vote, to a point where we are a thriving rainbow nation. It's inclusive. It has 11 official languages. And look, we are a young nation. It's only been 21 years. And yes, we do have some stumbling blocks we have to work on. But I feel overall the future is bright. I feel like we've come a very long way for a nation of 21 years of democracy. And I feel like in the next 20 years, we're going to be one of the most amazing nations to reckon with.